I hope that you are ready to get into chapter 3 of The Oath. Um, it really starts to get a little odd in this town, and like, well, some things are better off left just not said. So let's go on ahead and get into it. Discretion is advised. Um, there's just a little bit of meanness that starts to take place. Let's go on ahead and get into it. Although Hyde Valley is best known for its gold and silver mining, the rugged hills and forest lands of Rails Peak and Saddle Horse Mountain provide a unique outdoor experience for hikers, campers, anglers, and hunters. While Hyde Valley is rumored to have had more bear attacks per capita than anywhere else in the contiguous United States, such rumors derive more from tradition than fact and should not be taken seriously. Nevertheless, care and caution should always be exercised in the wild to prevent accidental encounters with bears. Always stay on the trails and take precautions with food. From a local travel brochure, circa 1970. There was one grizzly called Old Scar, lived up above the Tyler Gorge. He ate Jack Friday, I know. Jack went up there fishing and never came back, and all we ever found was his pole and one of his boots. Could have been Old Scar ate Jules Howard, and maybe he ate that lady cook we had. What was her name? Nancy, I think. Somebody found her apron and part of her foot out in the woods, but nothing else. Yeah, it's always been that way. Retired miner Homer Bentlow in recorded interview, transcribed in Hyde River Memories by Jill Stanton, copyright 1965. Chapter 3, The Victim. Herman 318, thanks to a team of hefty volunteers and a pickup truck, was now laid out on 2 sheets of 1-inch plywood and several sawhorses in Marcus Dufresne's garage near Rest Fork. Some of the volunteers wanted to hang around and see the verdict, but Marcus, being sensitive to Steve's situation, thanked them and sent them away. The 2 men went about the autopsy slowly, working under the ceiling lights and also employing a mechanic's work light at times. Just as Marcus let Steve have the first shot, he now let Steve handle the knife. Marcus had already estimated the bear's age to be between 10 and 12 years. Herman was a healthy bear with a good supply of fat under his hide. So hunger wasn't an obvious motivator for aggression. They found no significant wounds or injuries, only the bullet wounds Steve had inflicted. As for the contents of the stomach and intestines, well, Steve said, wiping his hands on a towel, we weren't expecting much anyway, were we? Marcus shook his head. I don't know what to say. They found donuts and bacon grease, of course, but 318 had also been feeding quite well on berries, roots, and herbage. There were a few shreds of food wrappings from someone's garbage. As for flesh of any kind, there was no sign of it. Steve felt disappointed and relieved at the same time. He hasn't been feeding exclusively on human waste, Steve observed, but I would say his diet suggests habitation. Although that's all it suggests, Marcus countered. I agree. We can extrapolate and infer aggression, but there's no objective evidence. They both looked forlornly at the old dead fire, its belly opened like a broken suitcase, its innards spread out over the makeshift table. And you're sure you don't have some other candidates out there? Steve asked. Marcus gave a slight chuckle. Well, all I can say is that Herman was the best, most likely candidate. He was the most logical candidate. And given what we know, I guess we got the culprit. Steve was unsatisfied and didn't hide it. We'll see what Evie has to say. How's she doing? She was in bad shape yesterday, but I'm sure she'll be okay given time. I hope she can tell us what happened. That would clear things up for sure. Then came a silence. Both men were thinking the same thing, but Marcus was afraid to mention it, and Steve didn't want to talk about it. Marcus finally gave it a try. So when's that autopsy? It was supposed to be today. I could give the coroner a call. Steve checked his watch. Kinda late. I can rouse him, I think. Marcus approached his next question carefully. How much do you want to know? Steve looked down at 318, regarding the rows of teeth and the long white claws. Just enough, Marcus. Just enough to know for sure. Midway between dusk and dawn, amid the silhouettes of old ruins etched in charcoal against the velvet sky, a lone figure stole silently past the old teetering walls and crumbling foundations, his black clothing blending with the deep angular shadows so as to make him invisible. No one would know his business. Everyone else was afraid to go near this place. With silent, feather-light steps, he entered a large ruin, letting its three remaining walls shroud him in their shadows. In the center of the collapsed and rotting structure, he knelt before a large flat stone and placed his hands on its corners, his gaze fixed upon the stone's dim, muttering his request in a quiet monotone. When he had finished, he drew a slip of paper from under his coat, placed it on the rock, and with a large black pencil scribbled a name, which he repeated over and over. Margaret Elizabeth, Margaret Elizabeth, Margaret Elizabeth. With the strike of a match, he set the paper on fire. Time for you to die, Maggie. The third morning after the attack, Steve met Tracy Alice at the Clark County Medical Center. Evelyn was coherent and recovering. It was time to talk to her about what had happened on Wells Peak. They paused near the nurse's station to compare findings. Steve was dressed in casual slacks and shirt. He no longer looked like a grizzled, half-crazed outdoorsman. Tracy was back in her uniform, armed with a notebook and the case photo for the upcoming interview. Tracy looked troubled. The team finished combing the area all around the campsite, and the dogs have searched the wider area around Wells Peak, she shrugged. They didn't find anything. Steve only sighed. The autopsy on 318 showed a diet consistent with habitation, but beyond that, there was nothing conclusive. He handed her a photocopy of his written report, which consisted of just a few paragraphs. He liked berries, roots, grass, and some human garbage, and the donuts we put out for him. But that's all we could find. My report will take about 30 seconds to read. So you have it settled on 318 as the culprit? Steve only spread his hands. He really is the only viable candidate, and I'm willing to accept that. I'm just saying that the autopsy couldn't establish anything one way or the other. Have you seen the autopsy report on your brother? Marcus talked to the coroner last night, but I haven't seen the report yet. Have you? She nodded grimly. Got a copy this morning. She hesitated before saying, the bottom. Yeah, that's what the coroner told Marcus, and I guess I can't argue with that. Steve looked down momentarily. Marcus and I have talked about actually viewing the remains. He was quick to add, but I think I'd rather have Marcus do it. I trust his judgment, his powers of observation. Tracy thought about it, then nodded. Have Marcus do it. Come on, let's see what Evie remembers. When they entered the room, Evelyn was sitting upright, the mattress raised and several pillows placed behind her back. Well, said Steve, smiling, you're looking better. Half vertical, anyway, Evelyn answered with a slight smile. You've met Deputy Ellis? I think I met her 2 days ago. Tracy smiled. You did? Well, hi again. Hi. There were 2 chairs in the room, and Steve and Tracy pulled them close to the bed, then sat down. At first, they talked in generalities about Evelyn's health, her 2 boys, Samuel and Travis, her mother, Audrey, the care she'd received, and anything else that came to mind that would not be difficult. Steve was encouraged. Evelyn was making perfect sense, speaking coherently. She was on her way back. So, said Tracy, her tone and pacing signaling the approach of a tough subject. Mrs. Benson, how comfortable would you be talking about what happened on Wells Peak? We still have to finish our investigation. You do understand, don't you? Sure. Tracy looked towards Steve. I'm glad Steve can be here. He's been working at his end, and the sheriff's department has been doing what it can, but without a witness, it's been tough. Evelyn was apologetic. Officer, just call me Tracy. Okay, Tracy. I have to tell you, I don't remember very much. Well, Tracy said, trying not to be pushy, just start at the beginning and see how you do. Evelyn's face was troubled. She was struggling to remember, but also feeling pain at every recollection. I remember Cliff went down to put away our leftovers. We cooked up a meal for the evening and, what did you have? Steve asked, hoping to jog her memory. Let's see. Evelyn thought for a moment, then said, vegetable soup and some crackers. Nothing meaty, spicy, something that would give off a strong smell. She shook her head. No, we try not to eat that kind of stuff if there might be bears around. Besides, if I eat rich food after hiking, I want to throw up. Steve nodded, pleased and amused. So, okay, then what? He went down the hill to where he had the food stored, and it was dark by then, so I couldn't see him very well. By now, Tracy was discreetly scribbling notes. What time was that? About what time was that? I guess between 9 and 10. Do you always eat that late at night? Evelyn answered, no, we'd been doing a lot of hiking and took a long time to pick out a campsite. Then we figured we'd better get the tent up first, and by that time the sun was going down. Then Cliff wanted to rig up the food cache down in the trees while we still had some light. It all took time. So anyway, said Steve, you ended up eating late. Evelyn nodded, and cleaning up late. So then Cliff went down to stow the leftovers, Tracy prompted, and Evelyn fumbled. And Evelyn fumbled. I just remember him going down the hill in the dark, and I couldn't see him, just his flashlight sometimes. She stopped. She looked at them. And they looked back. Silence. Tracy prompted. He'd gone down the hill with his flashlight. Evelyn just shook her head. And then I woke up in this hospital. Steve was disappointed, downright frustrated, actually, but tried not to show it. He looked as casually as he could at Tracy. She seemed strangely detached as she studied her notes. Her next question had a lighter tone. So, Cliff was a photographer? Uh-huh. Mainly he did wildlife photography. Tracy looked at Steve. So this outdoor stuff must run in the family. Steve smiled. He welcomed the lighter topic. Pretty much. Tracy turned back to Evelyn. So was that why you were up there on Rose Peak? Was he taking pictures up there? No, we just wanted to get away together. Just get some time away, huh? Yes, he'd been working a lot of hours and we needed some time alone. We've been out hunting in Hyde Valley before. We really liked the Rose Peak area, so that's where we went this time. I understand your husband had been working in Hyde Valley for a few months, is that right? That's right. Steve thought, impressed. Tracy has been doing her homework. Doing a photo shoot up and down the valley, Tracy continued. Evan nodded. He was doing local sportsman stuff, hunting, fishing, that kind of thing. But he shot a lot of pictures in the old mining towns. He's always liked getting into the history and the people. So he was away from home a lot? Evelyn hesitated just slightly before answering. Sure. He had to go where the pictures were. It must have been tough. Evelyn shrugged a little and sighed. I took it in stride. But that's why you wanted to get away together? Just to spend time together for a change? Evelyn sounded just a little perturbed. I believe I just said that. So how would you say your marriage was going? Were you doing okay? Steve didn't say anything, but that question seemed a little odd. Maybe Tracy was just making bedside conversation. It wasn't a fiery romance. It wasn't a soap opera, Evelyn answered. It was just kind of in between. Tracy smiled. In between. We got along when we were together. When we weren't together, it was kind of hard to tell. Evelyn's tone was composed, but Steve had seen that look on Evelyn's face before. Tracy had better be careful. So things were going okay, but not, Tracy prodded. Not real okay. Evelyn went no further. Evelyn went no further. I need to give a little bit more emphasis and pause a little bit. I'm reading it like I would if I was reading it silently to myself, so I'm sorry. Not real okay. Evelyn went no further. Tracy scribbled some notes, then asked, Evelyn, do you own a hunting knife? Yes, both of us did, Steve interjected. She and Cliff used to go hunting a lot. Okay, Tracy replied, jotting it down. Evelyn, when you were found Saturday night, you still had your knife in your hand and the blade was broken. Do you remember that at all? Evelyn took a moment to search her memory. Maybe, kind of like a dream. I'm not sure. Do you have any recollection of attacking anything, having any kind of struggle and using your knife? Evelyn was becoming visibly upset. I don't know. There's just it's like a dream in my head and I can't remember it. Steve spoke softly, afraid he might press too far. Evie, we're looking for a bear today. We're looking for a bear, okay? We figure it was a grizzly that got Cliff. Do you remember anything like that? He was obviously leading the witness, but he didn't care. Evelyn closed her eyes. Steve, I can close my eyes and all I see is a big shadow. Did you attack it? Tracy asked. Well, I guess I did. Now Evelyn's voice had an edge to it. Wouldn't you? There was blood on your clothing and on the knife. Do you recall that at all? Evelyn stiffened with the memory. I remember some blood. Do you remember where it came from? Evelyn looked straight at Tracy Ellis. Tears fell in her eyes. I understand it came from my husband. Steve could read Evelyn's face clearly. A line had been crossed, a limit exceeded. He cut in. Evie, that's okay. You don't have to talk about it anymore. Tracy looked his way. She obviously didn't appreciate his intruding on her investigation, and Steve didn't appreciate her questions. He addressed Evelyn, the one whose feelings he cared about. This whole thing's been real tough, I know. Let's let it go for now, and you just rest up. Tracy, to her credit, picked up Steve's cue and relaxed. Yeah, just rest up. I'm very sorry to have to ask you such tough questions. Evelyn's gaze told Tracy she was not forgiven. Just doing your job, I guess. Steve rose to his feet. I've got some other things I want to look into. You just get better. He bent down and kissed Evelyn on the forehead. Thanks for your time, said Tracy. Evelyn turned her back to the deputy sheriff. Steve and Tracy made their way to the waiting area near the nurse's station. Each had an agenda for a serious talk and couldn't wait to get started. I'd like to know what that was all about, Steve demanded, trying to keep his voice low. Tracy tried the person in charge approach. I knew this would be a problem. Someone so emotionally involved. That will be enough. A couple who was sitting nearby looked their way. I'll be responsible for my emotions, deputy, Steve growled. You'd better concern yourself with how Evie must be feeling right now and how you treated her. Couldn't you see how frail she is? How could you go in there asking questions about knives and blood and how well their marriage was doing? She just lost her husband, remember? Tracy purposely paused a moment to calm the situation down. Then she tried to present a rational, professional position. I had to ask particular questions as a matter of routine. We have to cover all contingencies. Like how her marriage was doing, do you think for one moment? What I think is immaterial. I have a job to do. Her tone was formal as she said, You're a professional. You know how important objectivity is in a situation like this. Am I right? Steve wanted to lash back, but yanked his own leash and held it. She was right. He was offended and defensive for Evelyn's sake, and he was letting his feelings rule the moment. Tracy was in control. He wasn't. He took a breath and forced himself back into his professional role. It was like putting on a pair of tight shoes. Yeah, you're right. You're right, sort of. Sort of? Personal feelings aside, the idea of complicity on Evie's part is, well, it's untenable, unthinkable. And it seems you're having trouble blaming a bear, too. He wanted to deny it, but couldn't. I'm willing to accept any hard evidence. Then he narrowed his gaze, which raises the question of the autopsy report. He noticed her cringe slightly. Steve, is there additional evidence I still don't know about? She took time to formulate an answer. Maybe you do need to read that report for yourself. Maybe I need to view the remains for myself, she emphasized. Maybe you need to read the report and evaluate it first. He accepted that. Do you have it with you? She took the report from her folder. It was a document about 30 pages thick, held together with a large clip. He took it but didn't look at it. I'll read it before I confer with Marcus. Just keep in mind your relationship to the victim. I'm aware of my relationship to the victim. Who do you think you are, my babysitter? All right. All I want is the answer to our questions before you get any wrong ideas. She was clearly offended. Steve, I am not jumping to any conclusions. I do have questions, though. So I observed. She drew a breath, held it, then gave a long sigh. Okay, Steve, you're the expert. Tell me what happened. That's what I'm trying to find out. How is it that only Cliff was killed and only his blood was on Evelyn's clothes and Evelyn wasn't injured at all? If Evelyn came so close to the attack that she got Cliff's blood all over her, why wasn't she attacked as well? How did her hunting knife get broken, and how is it that she remembers everything else in such detail, even what they had for dinner and what time they ate and the order of events up to the crucial time in question? And then, ding, she's in dreamland. Steve had thought about that too. The attack was over by the time she got there. Upon finding what was left of Cliff, she went hysterical. We have the truck driver's testimony as to her disturbed mental state. And having gone hysterical, well, who knows what she may have done. Maybe she was embracing what was left or trying to put him back together. I don't know. But the hysteria is well established, I think, and explanation enough for her memory lapse. As for the knife, how do we know she didn't break the blade when she attacked the truck? The driver said the blade was already broken. So figure she ran around stabbing trees or something. She was out of her mind. But even your scenario puts her and her husband together at the time of death, and you'll have to admit an attacking bear isn't necessary to produce the blood on her clothes. Except that I don't like your line of thinking, Deputy. I can't even entertain such a possibility. You don't have to, Steve. You're not a cop. Granted. Silence. So what's your next step? I'm going to take a drive out to Hyde River and talk to some friends. The same friends who told you Cliff had been in the area? The same. It's a small community and word gets around. Well, I just might drive out there myself. She raised her hand. Whoa, hold on there. What? I know Hyde River. Did we agree on that? I guess so. So take this as wise advice from someone who knows. Don't go up there asking questions by yourself. You could get more trouble than you've ever wanted. He didn't follow her. I only want to ask around about. It doesn't matter, she interrupted. You'd be a stranger asking questions, and that's not welcome up there. He digested that for a moment. So we'll have to hope you find out something for both of us, I suppose. I suppose. Steve had already decided that wasn't going to be the case when he asked, so when do we touch base again? I'll call you tonight at the Tamarack, or you call me. She scribbled a number on a corner of a notebook page and tore it off for him. Here's my home number. You can try me at the sheriff's department or at home. I'll let you know if I find out anything. All right. She was ready to leave, and so was he. Steve, Yeah, she spoke carefully. Take it slow. Marcus Dufresne came to Steve's motel room that afternoon. He looked pale and sick. He would have preferred a shot of Jack Daniels, but settled for some coffee Steve had in a thermos. They sat at the small round table near the window, the autopsy report between them. For the longest time, Marcus only stared at the report, trying to find words, while Steve sat, reading silently, giving him as much time as he needed. I guess, Marcus finally began. Steve leaned forward. I guess the pathologist gave it his best guess. A grisly attack. Considering what was left of your brother, what else could he say? Have you read the autopsy report? Yeah, the whole thing this afternoon. Lot of technical jargon, but it was clear enough. Yeah, real clear. Well, what's in that report is what I saw today. Marcus stared. Marcus stared into space as if watching a replay of his visit to the pathology department. One shoulder gone, no head, one arm detached. There were some ribs. Marcus touched his own chest to illustrate. Just sticking out of the cut, the bite, whatever you want to call it. They were just snipped off, cut right through. It was a pretty clean bite line. As Tracy had done, Marcus traced it against his own body with his hand. It went from left shoulder to right pelvis. And did you read about the pelvis being cut through? Was it? It was. And the rest intact? Steve asked. Marcus nodded. The vital organs and the lower limbs were all there. Then he added, and that scar from the old gunshot wound? It was there. And the fingerprints from the left arm matched the prints on file with your brother's gun permit. Just so you know. Steve nodded and moved on to what he had been thinking about, agonizing over all afternoon. No teeth marks or claw marks? No. And no animal hairs. Marcus reached into his shirt pocket. But I got some scrapings. He produced a small vial and set it on the table. Looked like it could be dried saliva. The pathologist couldn't make anything of it, but maybe you've got some people in the university who can figure out what it is. Steve held the vial up to the light to examine the crusty slime. I'll FedEx it there right away. Then there was silence again. So, Steve prompted, what do you think? Marcus thought about it long and hard and then shook his head. Steve, this was one unique bear. Steve nodded. The soft organs were intact below the bite line. Mm-hmm. A bear will typically go for the abdomen, for the soft organs first. He took a sip of coffee, and Marcus did the same. A bear will bite, clamp its jaws onto its prey, tear at it, drag it. Marcus continued the line of thought. Yeah, bears do that. So do coyotes, wolves, cougars, vultures, eagles. This attack seems a little neat if you catch my meaning. Marcus spread his hands. So how do you explain it? Steve rested his elbows on the table, his chin on his interlaced fingers. I think Tracy Ellis and the sheriff are already looking for another explanation. Tracy was asking Evie questions about her marriage. Poor Evelyn, Marcus said, disturbed by the thought. Then he offered, I've seen a few chainsaw accidents that happened during wood cutting season. The cut in the flesh wasn't anything like that, though. Steve could feel himself getting nauseous. He hated the question even as he asked it. Could it have been done with a hunting knife? Marcus looked back at him, hating the answer. I suppose, but it would have taken a long time and a lot of careful thought. I'd find it easier to believe a large mechanical sawing device was used, like you'd find in a lumber mill. A device like that would be pretty far from the campsite. You're right. And if a human device was used, there is still the question of the missing half. If it was not consumed by an animal, then what became of it? Steve felt bile rising in his throat. He swallowed hard. I can't believe the things we're talking about here. I may not eat for days, Marcus said grimly. But you see the problem. If we reject the whole bear idea, then we have to open up the investigation to some horrible possibilities. I guess that's what Tracy's doing right now. I guess, then Marcus said. But the pathologist doesn't want to go that far. He said it was a bear attack. Marcus narrowed his eyes. But in person, off the record, talking to me, in other words, sorry. He couldn't account for the condition of the body. He couldn't say for sure what caused it. So we're back to where we started. Steve got up abruptly and headed for the door. I need some air. I'm with you. They stepped outside into the parking lot. Steve's vehicle, a well-integrated truck and camper combination, was parked near the room. Marcus walked over to admire it just for something else to think about. Nice rig. Yeah, I've put a lot of miles on it. It's been to Canada, Alaska, Yellowstone. Four-wheel drive? Oh, yeah. Marcus looked in the windows at the tight and efficient living environment. Then he turned. I'd better get going. I sure hope you solve this thing. Oh, I'm going to solve it, all right, Steve replied, his voice strained, even if I have to ruffle some feathers in Hyde Valley. So tomorrow we will be reading chapter 4. It really does start to get a little bit more intense. And I want to encourage you to continue listening and watching. I know it's probably more boring than heck to just see the top of my head while I'm reading. And I'm trying to really put character into the story as I read it so that you almost feel like you're there. But you just stick with it, and I'm telling you, it continues to get more intense. The story gets more intense. Anyway, I appreciate you, and thank you so much for watching. And stay tuned for tomorrow for chapter 4. I would give you a set time, but I never know when I'm able to actually get to it. Sorry. But I do always try to get at it at least around like 10:30, 11 or something like that. So anyway, I do hope the Jins will continue joining me, or will start joining me on this book reading. And as I said when I first started it, I've got other novels that I can read, and I am very excited to read every one of them to you, and a chapter a day. Anyway, as I said, I appreciate you, and thank you so very much for viewing, and you all have a great day.